If I were to suggest that Studio Shaft have mastered the art of experimental storytelling, I doubt that it'd be a revolutionary line of thought. It seems anything they put their hands on becomes akin to gold thanks to their unique shot compositions, interesting usage of color, and of course, the infamous head tilt. Whether we're talking Madoka Magica, Arakawa Under the Bridge, the second season and OVAs of Maho Sensei Negima, Makaku City Actors, Nisekoi, or any of the countless other titles they blessed with their weird genius, the end result is usually nothing short of mind-blowing. I really need to take a dive into their history on this channel like I've been doing at cons all over the place for the past year, but that's a video for another day. In looking at the openings for pretty much anything Studio Shaft does, you'll likely see a commonality. Most, if not all of them, are visually enthralling, which keeps audience retention, hooking them from the beginning and keeping them hooked. Examples include the opening for Negima Shiroki Tsubasa Ala Alba, which focuses on a set of billiard balls meant to represent the members of Negi's class, but for the most part doesn't show any of the characters themselves. Or the Arakawa Under the Bridge OP, which is visually impressive but doesn't say what the series is actually about. It's then that we get to the crux of this video, which is the enigmatic and controversial set of novels turned anime, the Monogatari Series. If you're unaware of what the series is about, here's the basic rundown. Koyomi Araragi is an ordinary high schooler who also happens to be a half-vampire, and the series details his attempts to save a line of girls from deities, demons, and other supernatural entities. Based on the novels written by the palindromic Nisio Isin, instead of having continuous seasons, each major arc, with the exception of those in Bakemonogatari, is a different series with a new name, generally a portmanteau of the Japanese word monogatari, meaning story, and a word summarizing the details of each respective arc. Bakemonogatari means ghost story, or mon story, but the other series don't work well in the English language, so I'll be referring to them in the original Japanese. I will warn you now, if you're not caught up with Monogatari, this video will contain plot spoilers up to the ending of Bakemonogatari. If you're okay with that, then by all means proceed down the rabbit hole, but you have been warned. At first glance, you might not think much of the openings that change with each new arc, but if you take a second, third, or even fourth look, you might be surprised at how much content each one teases. In this video, we'll be discussing the openings that can be found in Bake, which is the first series, containing stories Hitagi Crab, Mayoi Snail, Tsuruga Monkey, Nadako Snake, and Tsubasa Cat. Staple Stable is set within a photorealistic environment where, for the most part, staplers exist to represent the first, and one of the best, waifus in the series, Hitagi Senjogahara. But I can't help but wonder if the staplers serve a more important purpose than simply a nod to the character. In seeking the answer to that question, I came up with a possibility. I'd like to suggest that the way the staplers are always moving, leaving a trail of staples in their wake, is meant to reflect Hitagi's own tendency to keep moving forward without letting anyone else get too close. In this case, the staples themselves could represent people who've tried to help her in the past, but who are left behind due to her inability to accept said help. At around 52 seconds into this OP, the staplers begin to engage in various positions, all of which look sexual, which serves two functions: to remind the viewer that this is indeed an anime by Shaft, but also to reinforce the series' extremely sex-positive and oftentimes perverted nature for better or worse. Once the 108 mark hits, we're shown a colossal version of Senjogahara in, as far as we're aware, an empty city. I think this opening is meant to summarize Senjogahara's mental state in the time before she encounters Araragi. If you're unaware, she's been abused, her family's fallen apart, and she's come across a crab god who's taken away her weight. Yet she remains isolated, independent, and stubborn, threatening Araragi when he offers to help her. Internally, she's this cold, colossal being who has to deal with her problems on her own, hence the empty city. In rejecting his help by cutting the insides of his mouth, she learns of Araragi's ability to heal from any wound, and is able to see him as more than just a minor inconvenience. Kaeri Michi, or The Road Home, is a rather chaotic and upbeat opening that, if you were still unsure what kind of anime this was, might further confuse you. Since Mayoi Hachikuji is the lost snail, it'd be odd if we didn't see at least one of them at some point in this opening. That said, if you discount the fact that she looks like a snail when wearing her backpack, the first actual snail can be seen at 43 seconds in. In retrospect, this opening seems to be telling Mayoi's story, which admittedly is a trend with this series, as they're trying to introduce these characters in ways independent of the main narrative. If you notice, every character in this opening is a variation of Hachikuji herself, and she's found herself lost among the others. This could be referring to her existential crisis, as in the beginning of her arc, she seems to be unaware that she actually died 10 years prior, until that is revealed near the end of her primary arc. In other words, she's lost within her own mind, not sure which way to go. Finally, at around a minute 2 seconds, she sees a version of herself crying in the middle of the street and manages to get her home safe, yet the opening ends with her surrounded by clones. I think this is meant to suggest that Hachikuji wants to do the right thing and help people, but due to her ignorance regarding her status as a spirit, if she meets someone who doesn't want to go home, she traps them within a maze, thus rendering her desires moot. If they wanted to go home, however, as is the case with the lost clone, then they would be able to find their way back. It's tragic, especially when you take her backstory into account and consider how she died on the way to see her mother and is forced to be rude and distant to anyone she meets, lest she trap them within an endless maze. Ambivalent World is the first opening of this series that's just packed to the brim with symbolism. While Staple Stable and Kairi Michi both had interesting parallels, this one really pushes the limit of how much detail an opening can have in the short runtime. In this one, the first thing we see is the basketball goal, the meaning of which might be obvious to anyone who's seen the series, but I'll talk about it anyway. Kanbaru is an overall athlete, but she's most known for playing basketball, so the goal. As she sits on a bench surrounded by floating balls, she looks rather forlorn, perhaps even distressed. It's then that we see the reason she's upset, which is none other than the best girl Hitagi Senjogahara, who is, you guessed it, the object of her affections. Yes, that's correct. Kanbaru is, well, she says she's a Yuri, but I think the way she'd respond if you asked about her sexuality is probably yes, as she seems to be attracted to both Senjogahara and Araragi exclusively. I've been made aware of the possibility that Kanbaru is actually interested in Senjogahara, but is more teasing Araragi, which is entirely possible, but it really doesn't change much about the analysis, so I'll leave it there. Then we see Araragi's infamous ahoge, but we don't actually see his face. It's also the first time the supposed main character has appeared in an opening to date, which is important to note for future reference. As the camera pans back, we see that Kanbaru is merely looking on as Senjogahara and Araragi face each other, neither paying Kanbaru any mind. She's a third wheel, and this is upsetting her, but she doesn't do anything about it. Yet. It's then that we see the words Valhalla Kombi on the screen, of course referring to what Senjogahara and Kanbaru were called when they were still friends, and we see them collide with each other a la Evangelion's OP, as if to suggest that Kanbaru is fondly remembering the times when they were still friends. It's also reminiscent of a particular sexual position which could be teasing Kanbaru's desires, as well as the fact that she wants to rekindle their friendship. It's then that we see the Rainy Devil, also known as the main antagonist of this arc, also known as Kanbaru disguised in a raincoat. It multiplies, surrounding Kanbaru, and the bandages wrapping her arm are forced to unravel, transforming into a gigantic lily. Kanbaru is then surrounded in floating lilies as she begins landing and jumping off of other lilies, providing some cool visual effects. With so many floating lilies, there's bound to be some kind of ulterior meaning, right? Well, according to various sources including Flower Meaning and Teleflora, the white lily represents chastity and virtue. I've also been made aware that the lily in Japan symbolizes Yuri, so that's more than likely the intended meaning. It's then that we see Senjogahara standing atop a tower of office supplies, which we mentioned earlier is one of her symbols outside of the crab. As Kanbaru prepares to fall into her arms, Senjogahara cuts her in half with a pair of scissors, decimating the lilies in the process. If it's not obvious what this opening is meant to represent, let me give you my take. I think it's telling the story of Kanbaru's desires, both socially and sexually. She notices Senjogahara has entered into a relationship with Araragi and remembers the time when they were friends and a powerful team. This prompts the Rainy Devil to appear, convincing her to give up control of her body. It's then that her inner self comes out for all to see, and Senjogahara cuts her down in response. Or, and this is also likely, the scissors cutting her, and the lilies, in half is meant to represent Kanbaru's desire for Senjogahara to take her virginity. In any case, this was a mighty thick opening to crack, and I think it's only gonna get more interesting from here. Renai Circulation, the single most meme-worthy anime opening other than Snow Halation. I've seen so many variations of this opening that it's surprising when a certain franchise doesn't have one. Renai Circulation is the 4th Bakemonogatari OP, and this one forgoes the more serious rock stylings of Ambivalent World in favor of something more kawaii, as Sengoku Nadeko is more or less the cute emoto type that, for some reason, falls in love with Araragi. I think the biggest things to take away from this opening are the segments where Nadeko and Araragi are walking against each other, then in the same direction. They're walking against each other, meant to show how they're on different paths, and as such, they haven't seen each other in several years. Once they're reunited, they're once again on the same path, but if you notice, they aren't walking side by side, hinting at how they've grown apart. Despite that, Nadeko determines that she'll sort out the feelings she has for him. Does she like Araragi or does she love him? In order to figure that out, she hones her determination by working on what is likely the manga that doesn't really come into play until Bakemonogatari, but it's something to take note of. There's also the fact that this is the first OP to show Araragi's face, despite his expression being of someone forced to deal with his pesky younger sister. Someone he cares about, but not in the same way she cares for him. If this is accurate, I don't know what's stopping him, considering Araragi has a borderline predatory relationship with his own sisters anyway, so yikes. I believe this could also be reflective of the fact that they are of different worlds. For the brief moment she enters the world of apparitions, it's clear she's not made for that life based on how her personality changes. Nadeko and Araragi aren't of the same world, and for that reason alone, it's impossible for them to be together, even if the feelings were mutual. Sugarsweet Nightmare is an interesting one, because almost like in Stable, it's entirely shot in live action, but it's more of a stop-motion kind of live action. It differs from the first opening in that the actor meant to portray Tsubasa Hanekawa is also live action, compared with the animated Senjogahara found in Stable. It all starts with a pyramid figure, which is used quite often, and I think it could mean one of two things. One, it could symbolize the idea that Araragi is in love with Senjogahara, but he often shows signs of being in love with Hanekawa, and both girls seem to love him back. It's your traditional love triangle. Or pyramid, but who's counting vertices? It could also simply reference a cat's ear, considering Hanekawa plays host to the Sawari Neko. I think it's also worth noting the patterns drawn on the parts of Hanekawa's body look reminiscent of a subway or transit line, which could be representative of her constant desire to not go home. It could also symbolize her parental abuse, or it could even mean that she, like in Hachikuji's case, is lost in this maze called life. If it's that, it would make sense, considering she's the only person besides Araragi who was able to see Hachikuji, mostly because she didn't want to go home, which is also why she ended up falling into the maze in the first place. If you've made it to this point in the video, I want to thank you so much and invite you to click that subscribe button if you'd like to see more from this channel, and be sure to hit that bell icon to be notified every time I post new content, as if the subscribe button wasn't enough, YouTube! If you'd like to join my Discord server, you'll find a link to do so in the description below, as well as a link to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel financially. If not, then I look forward to seeing you around the internet. I'm Pixcelation, as always, reminding you to stay pixelated.